The hum of high-tech machines filled the laboratory, a rhythmic symphony of progress. Rows of scientists and engineers worked tirelessly, adjusting formulas, testing new compounds, and monitoring state-of-the-art biotech devices. But behind the flashing lights and whirring motors, there was one mind responsible for it all: Jim Carter. Jim had been with the company for decades. At 70 years old, he had seen the industry evolve from crude mechanical prototypes to cutting-edge biotechnology. He had spent his life building revolutionary machines, designing technology that no other company had even imagined, let alone replicated. But Jim wasn't just brilliant. He was irreplaceable. His blueprints, his calculations, his patents, they were the backbone of the company. Yet, despite his value, Jim was an unassuming presence. He wasn't one to boast. He worked diligently from his wheelchair, often lost in his own world of equations and designs. While others sought promotions and office politics, Jim only cared about his work. He wasn't a businessman. He was a scientist, an engineer, a creator. And that's precisely why no one realized how much power he held. Then came Karen Whitmore. The moment she walked through the sleek glass doors of the biotech firm, everyone could feel it. A storm was coming. Dressed in a designer suit, her sharp heels clicking against marble floors, Karen radiated power and arrogance. She was a newly appointed chief executive officer, replacing a retiring CEO, a man respected for understanding innovation and valuing his team. But Karen? She was different. She was aggressive, loud, and controlling. She believed in shaking things up, making it clear from her very first meeting that she didn't care about past success, only her future dominance. "I don't care how things were done before," she declared, pacing across the conference room as her icy glare swept over the managers. "I will run this company my way. If you have a problem with that, the door is right there." People exchanged uneasy glances. They had seen CEOs come and go, but this one was dangerous. Karen thrived on control. She had climbed the corporate ladder not by intelligence or experience, but through ruthlessness and intimidation. She didn't care about technology, patents, or even science. She only cared about power and obedience. And to prove that she was in charge, she needed someone to crush. That's when she set her sights on Jim Carter. Karen wasted no time making her mark. She redesigned entire departments without consulting anyone, fired senior managers, and brought in outsiders who had no experience in biotech. Meetings doubled in length, yet productivity plummeted. Within weeks, the company descended into chaos. Projects that were once on schedule fell behind. Employees, once passionate about their work, now spent their days trying to keep up with Karen's erratic decisions. The once thriving lab became a battlefield of confusion. But what truly set Karen apart was her need for dominance. She would walk into meetings unannounced, question scientists about their work, and dismiss their expertise with a smirk. When an engineer mentioned they needed Jim's input on a project, Karen scoffed. "Jim," she laughed. "You mean the old guy in the wheelchair?" The room fell silent. Jim never sought attention, but everyone knew he was the reason the company thrived. Karen didn't care. She saw Jim as nothing more than dead weight, a relic of the past, and she wasn't about to let him challenge her authority. Karen wanted Jim gone, not because he had done anything wrong, but because he represented everything she couldn't control. One day, she stormed into the lab, her eyes burning with impatience. Jim sat at his workstation, completely engrossed in his latest project. She loomed over him. "Jim," she snapped, "what exactly is it that you do here?" Jim looked up slowly, adjusting his glasses. Because from where I'm standing," Karen interrupted, folding her arms, "all I see is a man sitting in a wheelchair staring at papers." The entire room froze. Jim blinked, clearly taken aback. "I design and maintain the technology that—" Karen rolled her eyes. "Please, don't act like you're the genius of this company. This isn't the Stone Age. We use technology now." Jim stared at her, confusion etched on his face. The room felt heavy, suffocating with tension. Then came the final blow. "I don't know how you survived this long," Karen sneered, "but I promise you your little wheelchair pity party is over." The words hit like a gunshot in a silent room. Jim's hands tightened into fists, but he said nothing. He didn't have to. Everyone in the room saw it. Karen had just made the worst mistake of her life. It didn't stop there. Karen wasn't satisfied with one cruel remark. She wanted Jim broken. Later that day, she called an emergency staff meeting. Everyone gathered in the conference room. Puzzled, Jim was the last to arrive, rolling himself in just as Karen took center stage. She smiled, a predator circling its prey. Some of you may have gotten too comfortable under the old leadership, she began. But that ends today. This company needs change, action, results, and that means getting rid of what's holding us back. She turned directly to Jim, and I think we all know who that is. A murmur swept the room. Disbelief, shock, horror. Jim's jaw clenched. His knuckles went white against the armrest of his wheelchair. Karen leaned in, her voice syrupy sweet with condescension. "Jim," she said, "you've had a good run, but it's time to step aside. You're fired." Silence. Complete, deafening silence. Then came the whispers. "She can't do that. He owns half the patents." She didn't even check his contract? Karen didn't care. She smirked as security escorted Jim out of the room, never realizing the empire she had just destroyed. Because Jim wasn't just another employee. He was a company. And without him, it wouldn't survive. The room remained frozen long after Jim had been escorted out. No one spoke. No one dared to breathe. Jim, the man who built the foundation of the company, the mind behind the technology, the one person no one could replace, had just been fired in front of everyone. It was a reckless move, a suicidal decision, and Karen didn't even realize it. She stood at the head of the room, smiling like she had just won a battle. Now that dead weight is gone, we can finally move forward. The whispers began immediately, nervous, frantic, horrified whispers. Karen heard them, but she ignored them. It would take exactly 3 days for her to realize her mistake. The first sign of trouble came on Monday morning. Karen stormed into the lab, expecting full productivity now that Jim was gone. Instead, she was met with utter confusion. "Why are the machines off?" she snapped. A young researcher hesitated before speaking. We had to shut them down." Karen narrowed her eyes. "Why?" The head of engineering, a man who had been with the company for nearly 20 years, stepped forward. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he handed her a document. Karen barely glanced at it. "What is this?" "Jim's patents," the man said, his voice tight. Karen's stomach twisted. She snatched the paper and scanned it, her face drained of color. Jim owned everything. Every major machine algorithm and software, the lifeblood of the company, was patented under his name. And because he'd been fired, the company no longer had permission to use any of them. "You have to be kidding me," Karen breathed, flipping through the pages. It wasn't a joke. Jim's contract had a special clause. As long as he was employed, his technology could be used exclusively by the company. But if he was terminated unfairly, the company lost all rights to his inventions. And Jim Carter had been fired in the most public, humiliating way possible. Karen felt her throat close up. This wasn't just a small setback. This was a death sentence. By midweek, the company was in a full-scale crisis. Every machine designed by Jim had to be disconnected. Every research project involving his technology was shut down indefinitely. The company's flagship biotech program, the one set to revolutionize the industry, was suddenly dead in the water. Karen's phone exploded with calls from investors, the board, and panicked department heads. "How do we fix this?" One director demanded during an emergency meeting. Karen gritted her teeth. "We'll just redesign the technology. We have other engineers." The room fell into a tense silence. The lead scientist, a soft-spoken man who had worked alongside Jim for decades, finally spoke. "Karen, Jim's work isn't something that can be redesigned. He spent years refining that technology. It's impossible to replicate quickly." Karen's eye twitched. "Then hire someone better than Jim." The scientist laughed. A short, dry, disbelieving laugh. "Better than Jim?" he repeated. "Karen, Jim was the only one who understood this technology inside and out. You fired the one person who could have helped us. Karen's stomach twisted. The board members exchanged worried glances. Then one of them, an older man with sharp, calculating eyes, leaned forward. "Where's Jim now?" he asked. The room went silent. No one wanted to say it. Finally, the HR manager hesitated before responding. "He's with the competition." Karen's vision blurred for a second. "What?" she screeched. The words slammed into her like a freight train. Jim, the man she had publicly humiliated and discarded, had been scooped up immediately by their top rival. And now, their competitor had everything Karen had just lost. Karen refused to accept defeat. She wasn't going to lose to some old man in a wheelchair. She sent gifts. They were returned unopened. She offered him his job back, with a raise. Jim laughed. Then she called him herself. "Jim," she said, forcing a sugary sweet tone, "I think we had a misunderstanding. I was under a lot of stress, and—" Jim hung up. Karen screamed in frustration. The man wasn't just ignoring her. He was enjoying watching her crumble. She had underestimated him, humiliated him, discarded him. And now he was watching her empire burn from the other side of the fence. And he wasn't lifting a single finger to stop it. The final blow came exactly 2 weeks after Jim's termination. Karen had spent every day trying to undo the damage, trying to convince investors that everything was fine. Then one morning, a breaking news report flashed across every major business network. Karen sat frozen in her office, staring at the screen. Jim Carter had joined their biggest competitor, and not just as an employee. He was their new head of research and development. The headline read, "Legendary engineer Jim Carter brings patented technology to rival firm. Industry disruption expected." Karen felt her entire body go numb. Jim hadn't just left. He had taken everything with him. His new company was already preparing to launch innovations that would replace Karen's company entirely. Stock prices for Karen's company plummeted overnight. Meanwhile, Jim's new company saw a 200% surge in investments. Karen had lost. Not just her reputation, not just her control. She had lost the entire company. And Jim? He was watching from the sidelines, victorious. Karen hadn't slept in days. She sat in her office, surrounded by half-empty coffee cups, stacks of crumpled documents, an inbox flooded with furious emails from investors. The company's value had nosedived. Stocks were in freefall. Their flagship biotech projects were permanently shut down because they no longer had the legal rights to use Jim's patents. And then, just when she thought things couldn't get worse, a thick manila envelope landed on her desk. A legal notice. Jim was suing her. She ripped the envelope open, skimming through the lawsuit. Wrongful termination, disability discrimination, breach of contract. She felt her pulse hammer in her skull. The evidence against her? Overwhelming. The company's own security footage had captured her publicly humiliating Jim before firing him. His termination letter lacked legal justification, and dozens of employees had already come forward to testify against her. Karen slammed her fists on her desk. She had to stop this, because if she lost, she wouldn't just be removed as CEO. She'd be financially ruined. And worse, Jim Carter would win. Karen stormed into a last-minute emergency meeting with the board of directors. She needed allies. She needed a way out of this mess. But the second she stepped into the conference room, she knew she was alone. The faces staring back at her were cold, unforgiving, and furious. One of the senior board members, an older woman named Margaret Hayes, tapped her pen against the table. "Karen," she said, voice clipped, "do you have any explanation for the disaster you created?" Karen tried to keep her composure. "We just need to regroup. We can still—" Margaret cut her off. "Do you even understand what you've done?" she snapped. "Because of your ego, we lost millions in revenue. We lost our best engineer. And now, we are facing a high-profile lawsuit that we cannot win." Karen, clench your fists. Jim is just trying to... Another board member interrupted. "Jim doesn't have to do anything. You destroyed yourself. You violated employment laws on camera. You fired the one man holding this company together." Karen gritted her teeth. She had once commanded this room. "Now, She was a dead woman walking. The final nail in Karen's coffin came just days later. The lawsuit had reached the media. Headlines screamed across every major business publication. Biotech CEO faces lawsuit for discriminatory firing. Company in freefall. Former engineer sues corporation for millions. Insider info suggests CEO to blame. The public backlash was immediate. Investors pulled their funding. Clients terminated contracts. Stock prices plummeted another 30% overnight. That morning, Karen received an urgent summons to meet with the board. When she entered the conference room, security was already waiting. Margaret Hayes folded her hands and said, coldly, efficiently, mercilessly, "You're done, Karen. Effective immediately. You are removed from your position as CEO." Karen's breath caught in her throat. "You can't do this." Margaret tilted her head. "Oh, but we can, and we already have." Karen stared in shock as security handed her a box containing her personal belongings. The board members watched in silence as she was escorted out of the building she once ruled. Karen fought back a scream. Everything she had fought for, the power, the prestige, the control, was gone in an instant. And the worst part? She knew exactly who was responsible. Jim Carter. Without Karen, the company imploded almost instantly. The new interim leadership scrambled to contain the damage, but it was too late. Jim's competitor companies surged ahead in the industry, filling the gap left behind. Key investors fled to Jim's side, betting on his proven track record. Lawsuits piled up from Jim, from shareholders, from clients who had been misled. By the end of the third month, the company's stock value had dropped by over 70%. By the end of the sixth month, the company declared bankruptcy. Employees who had once thrived under Jim's leadership scrambled to find new jobs. Some found work at Jim's new company. Others weren't so lucky. What was once a thriving biotech empire was now a cautionary tale in corporate failure. And at the center of it all, Karen, the CEO who lost everything over a single bad decision. Karen sat in a cheap, dimly lit apartment, scrolling through the news on her phone. She wasn't CEO anymore. She wasn't even employable. Her name was ruined in the industry. No one would hire her after what she had done. Jim had destroyed her. And the worst part? He never even had to lift a finger. She had done it to herself. Karen clenched her jaw as she scrolled through the latest business headline. Jim Carter's innovations drive industry growth. Former CEO Karen Whitmore disappears from public eye. She threw the phone across the room, breathing heavily. Jim had won, and she had nothing left. Jim Carter sat in his new office, staring at the breathtaking view of the city skyline. It was a stark contrast from the sterile labs he used to work in, a sign of how far he had come in just a few months. His new company, Biotech Innovations, had already surpassed Karen's former company in every measurable way. Revenue skyrocketed. Investors who had once backed Karen's company had jumped ship and put their money behind Jim. New patents were in progress, and Jim had full creative control over the next generation of biotech advancements. Former employees from his old workplace had joined him, bringing their expertise and loyalty. His inventions, the very ones Karen had discarded like trash, were now being perfected and improved under his direction. And as for Karen, Jim smirked, leaning back in his chair. She was nowhere to be found. The last he had heard, she had burned every bridge in the industry. No one wanted to hire a disgraced CEO whose arrogance had single-handedly destroyed a multi-million-dollar company. Jim took a sip of his coffee, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. For the first time in years, he was free to create without limitations. And this was only the beginning. Not everyone had been lucky enough to land on their feet, like Jim. For the employees who had remained loyal to Karen, things had gone very differently. When the company collapsed, most of them were left scrambling for jobs. Some managed to find work elsewhere, but their resumes were tainted by their association with Karen. Others struggled for months before finally being able to rebuild their careers. A few, the ones who had actively supported Karen's decisions, found themselves blacklisted in the industry. One of them, Mark, a mid-level manager who had once been one of Karen's closest supporters, sat in a coffee shop, scrolling through job listings with growing despair. His phone buzzed. A text from a former coworker. Dude, Jim's company is hiring. You should apply. Mark hesitated, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. Apply to Jim's company? After everything that happened? Would Jim even consider hiring him? He sighed, rubbing his temples. Jim had never been a cruel man. He was brilliant, yes, but vindictive? No. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance to make things right. The narrator, one of the many employees who had once worked alongside Jim, had watched it all unfold, from the moment Karen had stormed into the company, to the public firing of Jim, to the disastrous fall of the empire she had tried to control. And through it all, one thing had become painfully clear. One person can make or break an entire company. Jim wasn't just another employee. He was the foundation of innovation, the heart of the company's success. And Karen? She had been too blind, too arrogant to see it. The narrator had moved on, now working in a less stressful lab environment. He still kept in touch with some of the former employees, many of whom had joined Jim's new company. Sometimes, late at night, he'd think about how different things could have been if Karen had just recognized Jim's worth, if she had just checked his contract, if she had just left him alone. But she hadn't, and now she had nothing. If there was one lesson to be learned from the downfall of Karen and the rise of Jim, it was this. Leaders who fail to respect their employees will always fail. Karen had believed power came from fear and control. She had believed she could command success without understanding the people who actually built it. She had been wrong. Success wasn't about control. It was about vision, respect, and the ability to recognize true talent. And in the end, it was a quiet, brilliant mind of an old man in a wheelchair that had shaped the future, not the arrogant CEO who thought she knew better. Somewhere in a sleek office, in a company that was now thriving beyond expectations, Jim Carter looked over his latest design. It was something new, something innovative, something that would change the world. And this time, there was no one standing in his way. No Karen, no incompetent leadership, no arrogant executives dismissing his work. Just Jim, his ideas, and the freedom to create. He smiled, reaching for his pen. Karen had once thought of him as insignificant. She had believed she could erase his contributions and take all the glory for herself. But in the end, it was Jim Carter who had the last laugh. Because while Karen's name faded into obscurity, his would be remembered forever. And that was the greatest revenge of all.